Welcome to St. Joseph Evangelization Network. This is Men on a Mission, and I'm your host, Peter Karutz. Today, we are here with Rich Chrismer. Good to have you here.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for coming. You know, Rich is the 4th annual Catholic Man of the Year here in St. Louis. And full disclosure, I was one of the judges, but the secrecy is great. All the applications come in, they're blacked out so that we can't know the people, we don't know where they come from. And I got to tell you, I'm so happy that you're here. I'm so happy to get to know you. What I'm certain of is those few words on the piece of paper really didn't do justice to all the good work you do. So thanks for being here.
Well, I've been humbled my entire life by knowing Jesus Christ and loving God and having been guided. And so I've had activities. So to be nominated for Man of the Year, Catholic Man of the Year, is just unbelievable. And then to actually win with all these wonderful men who I know personally would be qualified, more qualified than I could ever be. I'm just happy to be here today.
Right. I think that's one of the characteristics of everyone who gets nominated. They say, I don't want to be nominated, but you know, you're here. Let's we'll have a great example of your life. And talking about your life, as I was reading your bio in the beginning here, toward the beginning, I remembered a story a very good friend of mine told me. His name is Tony Kester. And when Tony was young, his father was out of the picture, his mother was had several children, and they put Tony in an orphanage. I thought, wow, I was so struck. I thought, how could that ever happen? And I see that something similar happened to you when you were young.
Absolutely. I had, my mother had cancer. She was pregnant with my brother, Mike, my younger brother, Mike. And my father just tore up the Bible, threw it at her, and left us alone. And we moved in with my grandfather, and the priest up the street, St. Edward's Parish, in St. Louis said, you can't have these young people raised with all these uncles living in the house, these small homes. And so they suggested St. Vincent's Home for Children, which was a very difficult thing for my mother to do, to leave all 4 of us off at St. Vincent's Home for Children. And you mentioned Tony Kester. He was a year ahead of me, and I remember him in St. Vincent's Home for Children. And he moved to a subdivision in North County a year before us, my mom was able to be cured of the cancer by the grace of God. And we moved probably 7 blocks from each other. And so I knew him all growing up. I knew Tony.
You knew him as a young boy. That's almost incredible.
And I know him as a good man now.
He is. He's a great man.
Yes.
He's a great man. So you started out, it was a little bit hard. You were in the orphanage, but your mom was cured. I don't think I heard about being cured from cancer in those days. I think you died. Today I hear about the cure. So you say as a grace from God, I imagine your mom was a very prayerful woman.
She was an incredible, wonderful woman. We had a wonderful prayer life. I remember one of my great memories, many memories of my wonderful mom, is her and I used to go down to perpetual health devotions on Tuesday evening. We'd walk down the street. We were about 5-6 blocks from the church. I don't remember the other kids going with us, but I remember my mom and I did that. We'd say the rosary every night. She had this large statue that had a rosary inside of it, of Mary, of course, Lady of Fatima. And we'd get down on our knees after our supper meal, and we would say the rosary. But she was a true spiritual guiding light for me.
Well, and there's no doubt that your mother had a great influence on you. Statistics show that when the father is in the household and the father is a man of faith, the children have a faith all their lives. You and I and Tony, we're sort of bucking the trend a little bit. So I have no doubt that your mom made a great difference. But now, as we go through a little bit of your life, you are a man making a difference. And if you don't mind, I'm going to just jump around a little bit, but I understand that you were in the military. What branch were you in?
I was in the Air Force.
Air Force. And were you in the Vietnam era?
I spent 3 tours in the Vietnam War. The first year, I knew when, a lot of people don't know this, but 74% of the men who served in Vietnam were volunteers.
I didn't know that.
Only 26% were drafted.
Huh.
And I probably knew I was going to be drafted, so I joined anyway, knowing I was going to go to the war. So
right.
I was selected to do weapons. I was a weapons specialist in the Air Force. So I knew I was going to Vietnam, and I spent the first tour there. It was war. It was Vietnam.
Right. And I know that we have had a little bit of revisionism, if you will, over the years on Vietnam. I was 14, I think, when the draft ended. And one thing that we forget as so many years passed is that communism was coming into that part of the world and really invading the whole world. And we were still fighting for freedom at that point, for them, as we do today in our country and around the world. So thank you for your service.
I felt strongly enough that when I came back, shining shoes and keeping my locker straight was just not what I felt like doing. I wanted to go back over and help these people have a democracy and keep the communists from North Vietnam and the Russians and the Chinese who were supporting North Vietnam coming down south. So I went back and served 2 more tours of duty, and then I guess through the third one I finally got sense enough to realize this was a dangerous place to be, so I came back to the States and
you got married, I guess.
Well, actually, that's kind of a surprise, too. Actually, I was at McConnell Air Force Base, which is a Tactical Air Command, and about in December of 1971, I was asked to go to Blytheville, Arkansas. Well, I wasn't asked. I was ordered to go to Blytheville,
this
Arkansas.
ask is very loose.
Yeah, the military.
Please, would you go to Blytheville?
But while I was there, I noticed a lot of guys who I served in the war were coming to the same base. I said, what are we doing here? This is a Strategic Air Command base, which is a B-52 bomber base. It had nothing to do with what we were trained to do. And February 13th of 1972, the knock on the door, 3 in the morning, you're going to Guam. I said, when are you going to Guam? He said, yeah, you have a 6-month tour. I said, I'm getting out of service in August. How do I have a 6-month tour in Guam? I'm getting married in May. And they said, well, you're going. Well, I went.
Another one of those requests.
When I went, right. And the first month, I couldn't even call my mom. Of course, I couldn't call my fiance because we weren't married yet. So I wasn't even allowed to call my mom. When I was eventually allowed to call my mom, she must have been actually going crazy. What am I doing, a 4th tour in Vietnam? And I said, no, Mom, I'm not in Vietnam. I'm not in danger in any way. I'm in Guam. No, I'm sorry. I couldn't tell her I was in Guam.
Right, yeah.
Because it was a secret mission, bombing of Haiphong Harbor. And so I was sitting at an NCO club one night, and I told my mom, I'm trying to get back home for our wedding, and I don't know if I can or not. So I met a guy who had 2 stripes who looked as old as I am now. In other words, he had been kind of a troublemaker, and he came over and he said, what's going on, Sarge? You look sad. I said, I got to get home. I've been asking the first sergeant if I can get back home because I don't belong here. I need to be home to get married. And he said, well, go see the Inspector General, which is not a general. He's usually a colonel who's a lawyer for the enlisted. And he said, you have the permission, you always have the right to ask. You may not be given that, but you have a right to see the Commander-in-Chief. I said, the Commander-in-Chief? Well, he's in Washington, D.C. Now, the Commander-in-Chief is the President of the United States.
That's right.
But we don't call him the Commander-in-Chief. We call him we don't call him the President, we call him Commander-in-Chief. So I went to this lawyer, and I'm sitting in, I had just turned 25 in April 9th, and sometime late April, I'm standing in the commanding base officer's office, and I'm getting ready to go meet the Commander-in-Chief. President Nixon, the President had just...
He's in Guam.
He had left. This 2-striper knew that he was coming to Guam he had just opened China up.
Wow. And
he came to Guam on his way back to Washington, and I asked permission to see him, and the request does not have to be obeyed. But the base commander was telling me, you tell the Commander-in-Chief that we're doing everything we can to get you off this base. I said, sir, I've been trying to get off this base since the day I got here. I didn't want to come here in the first place. I'm supposed to be married in May, and Well, you just tell him. So Agana, Guam is right outside Anderson Air Force Base. At that time, there was only a two-story hotel. It was the biggest hotel there. Now they have Marriott's and everything in Agana, Guam. But so I drove they drove me in a car, 5-minute drive to the hotel. I went upstairs to the second floor. I'm sitting there in the hallway thinking, what have I done? I'm supposed to go speak to the commander-in-chief of the United States military. And a little while later, a man walked down in suit and clothes. He said, well, the president will see you now. And I looked up. I said, who? He said, well, the president of the United States. I said, oh, yeah, that's
what I'm doing.
That's what you call him. So I walked down, and they opened the door, and there's President Nixon sitting at a desk. And I saluted him, and he put his hand out to shake my hand because he was commander-in-chief. I saluted him, and he said, have a seat, Sergeant. And I said, oh, I'd rather stand. I'm scared to death. I'm scared to death. And he had my records in front of him, and he was talking about my service, my 3 years in the Vietnam War, and he was talking about this medal and that medal and this ribbon and
3 tours.
Ribbon. Yeah, so I have a lot of fruit cocktail from being over there for so long. They basically threw the stuff at you. I don't know if I earned any of it, honestly. But so in the middle of the conversation, he said, so you want to get married, huh, Sergeant? I said, yes, sir, I do want to get married. And he said, well, we'll see about that. And I didn't know the conversation was over because the civilian walked in, and he said, the meeting is over. I said, oh, okay, you know, and I saluted the president and shook his hand. He put his hand out again. I shook his hand and walked out. And 2 days later, I'm back in the United States. And about 3 weeks later, I got married on May 13th of 1972 to the most wonderful woman I've ever met in my life.
That's incredible. Let me. I mean, it's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. So I can only imagine that you committed this to prayer. I mean, you prayed a lot about this.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And your, I won't say commanding officer, but the colonel, I guess, told you that you can go back if the president says you could go back. I got to imagine that meant no and no way. And what does the Holy Spirit do? He says, I want these two to get married. And he found a way. That's
the Holy Spirit found the way. My prayers were, again, almost exactly what the colonel said to me is what I was thinking, that there's no way.
There's no way.
First of all, I doubt if I'm even going to get to see him. You know, you can make a request, but the military does things the way they want to do
Absolutely
things.
right.
And so my prayers, and I'm sure my fiance, who probably at this time still didn't know where I was,
Right.
only that I was safe somewhere.
Sure.
Never knew I was going to make it back, so I'm sure she was praying, thinking, does this guy have cold feet or something? Is this the reason for him being over there? But I had a lot of prayers from a lot of people, and the only way I got home was through prayer.
Right.
I think President Nixon was the messenger, but the prayers were answered by God. My prayers were answered. God answered my prayers.
Nixon's boss kind of took care of things here.
You're right.
You know, I've heard this so many times. If you are praying for something and you are fervent in this prayer, if you're praying for with all your heart, be careful what you pray for, because you're going to get it. So good for you. What a miracle. What a way to start a marriage with a miracle, huh?
It's a miracle. Matter of fact, our first dance we danced to was "We Only Just Begun" by the Carpenters.
Well, I understand, we were talking before this program, and I just flat assumed you were a lawyer, but you're not, but you've done a lot in the law. I see a few little feet on your lapel, and
Yes.
I think that means something. Now, you're a good veteran. I'm sure you've lived a good life, and never done anything wrong, and never seen the inside of a jail. But
Yes,
you sound like a lawyer.
Well, first of all, I'm not a lawyer. Second of all, I've seen the inside of a jail many, many times. In 1972, we were married. In 1973, the most despicable decision by the Supreme Court came along, Roe versus Wade, which legalized abortion. The court Justice Blackmun wrote the opinion. It's 34 pages, it's single space, it means absolutely nothing. That afternoon, they also had another court case called Doe versus Bolton, which is where they came up with the 3-trimester series. So abortion has been legal in 1973, January 22nd, 1973. It's been legal 9 months the entire time we have been here.
And let me take our viewers back and challenge you. Go online and search for the Roe case. It's on audio. You know, they don't videotape it, but it's on audio. And they got 2 bites to the apple. There are actually 2 hearings. Listen to them, and you will gain some great insight. The other thing is there's a justice who is known today as the, you know, clearly pro-abortion, most liberal person out there, RBG, right? Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She has wrote many times that it was decided wrongly. So it is wrong from a moral standpoint, wrong from a legal standpoint, wrong from the life standpoint. But you're right. I mean, right, you got married, and the next thing you know, you have this happen. And I guess that influenced the direction of your life as well.
Yeah, we were, God was good to us. We wanted 12 kids.
12.
We really did want 12. God gave us 4, and then we lost little John Paul in the womb. He never had he was living, but
sometimes
he
I
was
think
never born.
Sometimes I think it's a miracle that a child is even born at all. We lost one as well, and I know many people have lost them. When you lose a child in the womb, I don't even know if we have to qualify. When you lose a child, one thing that you find out is that so many other people do too, and there's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of grief.
There's a lot of that. And so there's absolutely no reason why this country should allow. It's not a law. People say, oh, it's the law of the land. No, show me the Congress, show me the president to sign a bill that made this legal. It was a Supreme Court decision, and the Supreme Court decision can be overturned. We did overturn a little-known court case back in the 1860s that said that African Americans who were in this country were only 3/5 human.
That's right.
That was overturned by a civil war. We don't want a civil war, but we want justice for the unborn. And that's been a really strong part of my wife and I's life, so much so that we joined the All Saints, that's the parish we were in at the time. We joined our pro-life committee immediately, and got to meet Dr. Mildred Jefferson, who was the first president of Missouri, National Right to Life. We met her in St. Louis in '74, and this is an African-American woman. She's a story all by herself. She's an African-American woman who graduated from Harvard Medical School back in 1934.
That's incredible.
She was African-American, she was a woman, yet she graduated from medical school. And of course, you never hear about her on Black History Month because she was president of National Right to Life. And we, in the early 80s, what happened is I went to St. Joseph Hospital, where the St. Charles chapter of Missouri Citizens for Life, I guess it was in '79 or '80. And I walked in, the first thing they said to me, a wonderful lady from St. Charles County named Dolly Johannesman, who is purely a saint. She's having a difficulty. She probably won't last much longer on this earth, but she's going to be living in heaven. But I walked in, and she said, "What's your name?" I said, "Rich Chrismer." She said, "I nominate Rich Chrismer to be vice chairman of Missouri, the Citizens for Life St. Charles chapter." And that's actually how it happened. And I got involved in Missouri Citizens for Life as a speaker bureau, and spoke probably 600 or so speeches throughout the country, throughout the state of Missouri, throughout St. Louis area over the years. And I got more involved because I went to an abortion clinic in St. Louis County, and some people were there who were blocking the doors, and so they couldn't do abortions while these people were blocking the doors. And I thought, I think I want a part of that. And so I joined that group, besides being with Missouri Citizens for Life, besides being on the chapter, St. Charles chapter of Missouri Citizens for Life. And over the years, in the 1980s, I sat in or counseled girls at the abortion clinics probably 3 out of 4 Saturdays for those 9 or 10 years.
When you say sat in, what do you mean sat in?
Well, when the Protestants got involved about halfway through the abortion debates or the abortion fight, the abortion wars, we used to call them sit-ins. They call them something else.
Were you actually in the clinic or you were outside the clinic?
Sometimes we're outside the clinic, sitting there, locking arms. Sometimes we're inside, and we have many stories about that. I can tell you there was an abortion clinic on Euclid Avenue. Now it's now Planned Parenthood at a different location. And I had been arrested many times. And when you go to court, they decide what they want to do with you, and they always had someone from reproductive rights come in and testify. And so this woman knew me very well because she testified against me all the time.
So you were arrested for standing or sitting in front of the doors, or?
That's right. They call it trespassing. So it was a misdemeanor trespassing charge, and they usually would haul you off, and we would never walk. And people said, "Why didn't you walk?" I said, "Because we give more time for the girls to think about it, and less time for the abortion clinic to be open." So they would carry us out. And matter of fact, that's another story. When I got the Catholic Men for Christ, I explained how one time a girl called me on a Sunday morning, and the post dispatch had taken a picture of me being dragged out of reproductive services abortion clinic. And this lady called me up and said, "Is your name Rich Chrismer?" And I said, "Yeah, my name's Rich Chrismer. Are you the one who is being dragged out of the abortion clinic?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am." And she started berating me and talking about how terrible a person I was. And she said, "I tried to get an abortion in Columbia, Missouri, and there's your people. They're blocking the doors, and I couldn't get in for that, so I come here, and here you are, and I got to get rid of it." I said, "You have a baby." She said, "No, I don't have a baby. It is something I got to get rid of." So we talked for about 35 minutes, and like I was saying at the Catholic Men for Christ, when you're doing good and you think nobody's watching, people are watching.
Oh, yeah.
And she was. And we talked for about 35 minutes, and she finally said, "I just hate you people. I got to get rid of this." And I started talking about the gestation of the life of a child. So I said around the 24th, 23rd week, the baby usually kicks you. It's called quickening. And the girl on the other line said to me, "My baby just kicked me."
Oh, you're kidding.
She acknowledged that it was a baby. So I talked to her. I said, "Does your mother and father know you need support? We have support for you." Matter of fact, let me put my wife on the line, because my wife was really good at Birthright and Our Lady's Inn, places that take care of girls with problem pregnancies. And so my wife took care of her, and the baby was born. So.
Well, you loved her and you cared for her and you didn't even know her. You know, there's a survey that was put out, and I should say it differently. It wasn't published. It was conducted by Planned Parenthood, and it was trying to perpetuate the lie that you're unaffected by abortion afterwards. And this is a survey of post-abortive women. And the survey came back and it said that 85% of the women who had abortions, okay, they already had it, I said, if there was one person who would have supported me in the decision for life, one person, 85% said if there was one person, I wouldn't have done it. You were that one person.
Well,
God bless you.
by the grace of God,
Yeah,
I was there.
you were
Getting
there.
ready to go to church. I guess we usually go to Mass a little earlier that day. For some reason, we were a little late in getting, not late in getting to church, but we went to a later Mass, and I was there for that phone call.
Well, you know, the great philosopher Woody Allen said 90% of success is showing up. And, well, maybe he isn't a great philosopher. But, you know, as the Catholic man for Christ, I think one of your jobs, I'll just give you another one, is to be an example. You know, so many of us are fearful to follow the prompting of the Holy Spirit when we're prompted. You know, I think we've all felt it. You know, I think I ought to do this. I think I ought to say something. And then we remain silent. And it eats at us then, right? We have a little regret. We didn't do what the Holy Spirit wanted us to do. But let's turn that around, Rich. You've been prompted a number of times by the Holy Spirit.
Many times.
Have you ever regretted saying yes?
Never, ever, not once. I always say to people that if we'd all be millionaires if we had invested in Pepto-Bismol, because we used a lot of that. But we also had prayer partners. We could never, ever have done these sit-ins at the abortion clinics, whether it was counseling or actually sitting in, without prayer partners. Without prayer, we prayed incessantly while we were doing it, and we had people praying for us.
Yeah. It is amazing that when we talk about peaceful protest, the peaceful protest for whatever the issue was, it's always lauded, right? And what you did is, put him in jail and give him time. How much time did you? How many times were you arrested?
Probably close to 90, 95 times.
Isn't that incredible?
Only time I spent, usually it was only weekends in jail, but the longest I ever spent, I had to serve 3 months. I was charged. The pro-life people were praying for me. The pro-abortion wanted me to spend 6 months in jail, but the judge said 3 months. And so I didn't spend quite 3 months in jail, and that's for another day.
It is, and that's incredible. I mean, 3 months in jail for a peaceful protest. I mean, that's the evil one. I mean, that is the evil one working with people.
The odd thing about that particular arrest was we were doing public service to the people by telling them we're going to do a citizen's arrest of the abortionists, because he didn't have.
You should.
He didn't have hospital privileges in any hospital except Lima, Peru.
Lima, Peru.
And that's the one that got me to 3 months in jail.
Well, this sounds like something we're going to have to continue at another time. Our time is about over. It's just flown by. This is Men on a Mission, produced by St. Joseph Evangelization Network. I'm your host, Peter Karutz. This is Rich Chrismer, and I like the name Christmer. You've been a great example to me, and I'm sure to many people here in St. Louis. And I hope that with this award and recognition that you inspire other men, and I know you will inspire other men to say yes to the Holy Spirit. Say yes. You never regret saying yes. It'll eat at you if you say no. So come on back and see part 2, maybe even part 3. Chris?
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.